My name is Seraphina, the Masked Lady. I was once human. Since then, I have lived many lives. I have been loved and reviled, adored and despised, been the child of a poor prostitute and a courtesan revered by thousands. When I was a child, a stranger with no face offered me the ability to move between the worlds. Since then, my every death has led to a new life. I once had a true love. He was ripped away from me when I was murdered in the 18th century. I search for him still. In the meantime, I walk in the shadows behind the universe, visiting realms both exquisite and terrible and bringing back stories and rhymes to amaze the mind and enchant the ear. Through my YouTube channel, I send the stories out into the world, hoping that my true love will hear them and reply. Hoping, if he does not, that I will find in the other souls who listen kindred spirits to help ease the pain. What of you, stranger? Did you come here tonight seeking a mystery? Do you hunger for a spark of excitement, for the dark thrill of fear? Will you listen as my tales unfold, knowing that some may very well take on lives of their own? Consider, stranger, whether you have the courage to walk between the worlds with Seraphina, the Masked Lady. Hello, my delightful darlings, and a very good evening to you. How has your week been so far? I have been taking some personal time this week. After traveling between the worlds so often, I felt very much drained, so I treated myself to a few days in a spa. Okay, so I spent most of my time either soaking in hot baths or fast asleep, but the result has been amazing. I feel like a new woman. Well, almost. Don't worry, I didn't forget my friends. I came home early just so I would have the second part of our story queued up and ready to go. Just in case you didn't catch the first video, our story centered around a young girl who lives in an isolated woodland house with her grandparents, mother, aunts, and her young cousins. Sadly, the narrator's grandfather has recently disappeared under mysterious circumstances. As a result, the dynamic within the family has changed, and strange things have begun happening in the home. As the narrator describes her family's trials, she also makes repeated mentions of a story her grandfather used to tell about the Zwischenbaumen, or those who run in the spaces between the trees. The creatures, named Zwisches for short, have two forms. Sometimes, they appear as human women. On other occasions, they live as massive black wolves. We left our narrator last week having been woken from a nightmare by her aunt, who tells her the story of how the first Zwisch was made. Apparently, Zwisches entered the world when a curse is laid upon a princess by a jealous rival. The princess's husband, learning that his wife is pregnant and that the curse will kill both her and the child unless his wife eats his heart, orders his huntsman to slay him in secret, carve out his heart, and serve it to his wife in a stew. Where will we go from here? Will the narrator find her grandmother? What is the significance of the Zwischenbaumen? There is only one way to find out. So, get comfy, grab your snacks, and let's enjoy the second half of the spaces between the trees. The Spaces Between the Trees. Part 2. Chapter 9. The huntsman did as he was ordered. That morning, Alika ate the most delicious stew she had ever tasted. By the next day, she was well again. Her happiness was not to last. The secret of what had happened could not be kept forever. The poor hunter was beside himself with guilt, and when the prince's body was discovered on the edge of the woods, he confessed everything. Prince Alex had left a letter with the huntsman, releasing him from all culpability in his death. Despite that, the broken-hearted man allowed himself to be brought before the grieving princess. Without hesitation, he offered Alika his life in recompense for his crime. The wild thing in Alika wanted his throat, wanted to watch the light go out in his eyes and bathe in his still warm blood. But her human part heard Alex's voice calling from beyond the grave, imploring her mercy on one who had been double bound by love and duty. The battle was close, but finally, Alec sent the man back to his prison cell unharmed. In the end, the huntsman was not charged with murder. Instead, the royal family gave him a 10-year stipend as a lump sum and sent him back to stay with his family on a farm in another part of the country. Some stories say Alec went mad. Others say she simply kept herself in seclusion mourning her husband. Either way, at the end of 9 months, Alec gave birth to a healthy girl. The day after her daughter was born, Alec vanished. She was never seen again in the kingdom. What happened to the baby? I asked. She thrived. Alex's parents doted on their granddaughter. They had a good life together. For a time. When she was 12, the daughter also disappeared. I swallowed, chilled by the thought of everything that the family had lost. I waited, hoping to hear that evil princess had been captured and defeated, and Alec and her daughter reunited. But this was no fairy tale. Alex's parents continued to rule the country until the time of their deaths, my aunt said. After that, the land passed into the hands of a tyrant. Chapter 10. Do you understand the story? My aunt asked me. I nodded, although I didn't understand. Not then. Do you know why it's important? I shook my head. A voice spoke from the darkness beyond the doorway, making me jump. It is our story, dearest. My mother stepped into the room. She was smiling, but something about her smile made me queasy. Do you see? She said. It's not so bad. We Switchen weren't born of hatred. We were created from love. I started trembling the moment she spoke. The shakes became shudders when she opened her mouth. As I watched, it stretched wider and wider, impossibly wide, splitting flesh and bone. I closed my eyes. After a long moment, I opened them again. A giant black wolf padded towards me. It had my mother's eyes. Chapter 11. What do you do when your world falls apart? I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to vomit. In the end, I simply huddled against my aunt and shivered. My mother hadn't maintained the wolf form for long, but it had been long enough for me to understand that everything I'd thought I'd known was a lie. I couldn't look at my mother. Her mouth had not quite settled back into shape. It was vast. Far too broad to make sense, and her teeth were ridiculously sharp. When she squatted before me, putting her face level with mine, I tried to push myself backwards onto the sofa. Come now, she said, a little sharply. There is no need for that. You are safe. I'm just going to talk to you, all right? What could I do? Squeezing my hands into fists, I managed to nod. Good girl. Now, I will tell you where this family comes from. Chapter 12. Did I ever tell you why my parents moved to England? She asked. I shook my head. I knew that they had emigrated. When my uncles were born, my grandparents had been living in an Austrian village called Alsbach. By the time their first daughter arrived, they had moved to Sussex, England. We have lived in the United Kingdom ever since. Just after they moved to England, your grandpa had an operation on his heart. I knew that too. The operation had saved Grandpa's life. Well, Grandpa wasn't really ill, she said. It was Grandma who was unwell. The Switchen's hunger was on her. I stared at my mother, waiting for her to laugh and confess the joke. She did not. But Grandpa and Grandma have been together forever, I finally managed to say. How did she hide what she was? She didn't. Mother said. Grandma told Grandpa the truth. The first time Grandma saw Grandpa, she knew she loved him. After they had spent their 7 nights together, she was sure that she couldn't kill him, even though walking away from him might mean her death. When she tried to leave, however, your grandpa wouldn't let her go. He demanded to know what was going on. He insisted on having the truth. So Grandma told him that she was a switch and that loving her could only mean his death. What happened? Well, you know your grandpa. He's as stubborn as a rock. The fond smile that twisted my mother's too wide mouth was at once familiar and unnerving. He asked more questions, and your grandma answered them. When he was sure he knew the truth, Grandpa told her he needed to think. He asked her to meet him at the forest's edge by midnight the following evening. Grandma came fully expecting to be met by a mob bearing weapons and torches. Instead, there was just your grandpa. He was carrying an engagement ring. I shouldn't have been surprised that my grandfather had proposed. After all, we were all here as a result. Nonetheless, I couldn't help grinning. And she said yes. Not at first. She wanted to accept. But the thought of harming your grandfather was like a needle in her heart. She couldn't comprehend a future where one or both of them was not sacrificed to her nature, and she loved him more than the next beat of her heart. Your grandpa was patient, however. With loving words and calm explanations, he wore her down. By the end of the night, the ring was on her finger. The next morning, your grandpa took his new fiancée to meet his mother. Of course, Grandpa's family welcomed your grandma with open arms. How could they not? She was beautiful and kind, and Grandpa loved her with all his soul. They married in front of the entire village. People who witnessed the match said that no two young people had ever looked so blissfully happy. A month later, their joy was completed when Grandma learned she was pregnant. Your Uncle Eric was born first, then your Uncle Hans. They were males so they could grow without Grandma consuming Grandpa's flesh. Sadly, as soon as her third pregnancy started, Grandma knew that she was expecting a girl. Grandma was distraught. She could have continued living with your grandfather knowing that in a decade, she would have to tear him apart, or she could kill him and pass on his strength to me. Either would have broken her heart. When she told Grandpa they were expecting a daughter, he knew that the news meant his death. Chapter 13. Did he run? I couldn't help asking the question. The story was so odd, different from anything I had ever heard. Yet, the rhythm, the cadence of it, was familiar. No, baby, my mother said. He didn't even cry. He loved your grandma so much that he was willing to die for her and for me. He also had an idea. Over the years, your grandma and grandpa had often discussed our true nature. Your grandfather knew things about the Swishin that no human has ever known. The most important thing, for him at least, was this. When a Swish kills, how she eats determines her child's strength. The more meat the Swish consumes, the more resilient the child will be. I swallowed hard, feeling nauseated. The quality of the food impacts the child's nature. The type of meat has an effect too. Some parts of the body have little value as nourishment. Others, organs, for example, contain great power. The organ that has the greatest nutritional value is the heart. Back then, doctors could not do the things they can now. Still, in England, a few surgeons were talented enough to operate on a man's heart. It occurred to your grandpa that he did not necessarily need to die to provide for your grandma and the child. Just a little piece of his heart would give them as much nutrition as the rest of his body combined. Of course, I knew where the tale was going. I had known for some time. Now, however, the conclusion became inescapable. No, I shook my head. I don't want to hear it. My mother's voice went on steady and implacable. Your grandfather found a surgeon called Daniel Williams. He was a descendant of Daniel Hale Williams, who performed the first open-heart surgery in 1893. This Daniel was young and desperate for money. desperate enough to agree to something as nonsensical as performing an operation on a healthy man. Your grandma was 2 months pregnant when Grandpa went under the knife. Grandpa had already spent a good portion of their savings on a freezer. In those days, the devices were rarer and much more expensive than they are now. But for him, the freezer was an essential part of his plan. Daniel shaved off a piece of your grandfather's heart. Then he closed up your grandpa's chest and followed the instructions left for him. Daniel cut the piece of the heart into 4 sections, wrapped and froze them. 1 week later, my mother, your grandmother, ate a single piece of Grandpa's heart. 6 months after that, she gave birth to me. Your grandpa paid for a lifetime of love with a piece of his body. He gave us the chance to be a family. Finished, my mother fell silent. I sat there looking from her strange face to the floor. What was I supposed to think? Eating other people was just wrong. Then again, leaving your wife and child to die would be wrong, too. Why 4 pieces? I asked. Why did Grandpa freeze 4 pieces of his heart? Because he somehow knew that there would be 3 more female children and that your aunts, too, would need a piece of his strength. At the start of every pregnancy, your grandmother consumed a piece of Grandpa's heart, and every one of us was born whole and hearty. I thought about that. I thought about what Grandpa had done. Grandpa's procedure had been pioneering, to say the least. There must have been a chance that it would go wrong or that his heart, deprived of an essential part of its makeup, would fail. He was an intelligent man. He would have understood the risks. Still, he had moved halfway across the world and surrendered himself to the knife so that my mother and aunts would have a chance to exist. When it came down to it, Grandpa had loved us. He'd loved my grandmother so much that he'd been willing to give her his body and soul in a pretty literal sense. Who didn't dream of being loved that way? Even so, that didn't explain where Grandpa had gone. Was my mother suggesting that she and my aunts had eaten him? What about my cousins and me? We had always assumed that our mothers had chosen to live alone, and questions about our fathers had been discouraged. But if Grandma and Grandpa had lived and loved together, surely others would have done the same. What about us? I asked. Are our daddies out there somewhere too? My mother looked sad. Slowly, she shook her head. Not every man is strong enough to love a switch. You ate my dad. I threw up. Chapter 14. My mother watched me vomit without moving. Usually, when I was sick, she cradled me, holding back my hair and wiping my face. This time, she simply waited. When I could speak again, I wiped my mouth and asked, if Grandma loved Grandpa so much, then why did she kill him? My mother looked hurt. She didn't, she said. Your grandpa died of a heart attack. Your grandmother wept for 3 hours. Then she ate him. That was when I passed out. Chapter 15. When I woke up, I was outside, lying in the long grass. It was nighttime, and the air around me was cold and still. My body felt strange. I tried to sit up, but my back felt odd and stiff. My palms were numb, and when I tried to flex my fingers, I couldn't feel them. I tried to look around to figure out exactly where I was, but my eyes wouldn't open. They didn't feel like they'd been covered, just heavy. I could hear someone making a low panting sound. After a moment, I realized that it was me. Fear raced through me. What was I doing here? Why was I no longer in the house? Did my family mean to kill me now that I knew their secret? No, that didn't ring true. Whatever else my mother and aunts might be, they had always been protective and affectionate. Besides, they were Swishin. If they'd wanted me dead, they could easily have torn out my throat while I was unconscious. Nobody would have noticed a small grave in the woods. So, this was not a place of execution. Still, my location and altered body confused me. It took me nearly a minute to realize that the strangeness did not stop there. I was not alone. Someone nearby was singing in a soft, sweet voice. She was singing a lullaby, the same lullaby that my grandmother had used to lull me to sleep ever since I was born. This time, when I tried to open my eyes, they slid upwards. I could see the space around me better than expected, considering it was dark, but the night had an odd bluish tinge. My eyes sought the source of the sound and found a woman. She was completely naked, and she was looking at me. When I lowered my eyes, embarrassed, the woman laughed. It was the laugh, above all, that confirmed what my gut was saying. The woman was my grandmother. She was my grandmother, but she was not the same woman I had known all my life. Her face worn, and her body bent with age. She was young and beautiful, her body firm, and her dark hair hanging down to her slim waist. I tried to speak to her to ask what was going on. Instead, I uttered a short, sharp yip. The sound frightened me. I shook my head, wanting to refute it, and realized something was interfering with my vision. Something floated before me. Something furry. It looked like, could it be, a muzzle? My grandmother watched me without moving. She did not seem unnerved to find that her granddaughter had been transformed into something inhuman. Instead, she gestured to the far side of the field, where a deep pool lay, sheltered by a stand of yew trees. The moon is bright tonight, my grandmother said. The water is still. The pool will make a good mirror. What do? I asked silently. Look, she whispered, and see what you are. My heart thudding, I padded slowly over to the pool. When I looked down, I saw the face of a black wolf staring back at me. Chapter 16. I ran. I ran away from my reflection, from the image of the wolf, and from the knowledge of what it meant. I raced down forest paths and up stony banks, but my headlong flight did no good. How could it? I was running from myself. Still, I ran, and as I ran, I bayed, yelling my fear and misery. At first, that was all that I cared to do. As the miles passed, however, I became used to how my new body moved. The rhythm of my paws began to soothe me. The scent of the woods burst around me. Earth, loam, and growing things. I could feel it breathing, could sense everything that scuttled, flew, and fled. Even while the human half struggled to comprehend its fate, a part of me rejoiced. Miles later, it occurred to me that perhaps there was a reason to be happy. There was a freedom in my new state that my human self had never enjoyed, no clothes to rub my skin raw, no shoes to pinch my feet, no rules, no chores, and no schedules. Excitement joined my fear. Unlike some children, I would not have to leave my family to secure my freedom. Those I loved were already here. They knew what I was and understood me better than I understood myself. A new world opened up before me, a world with no homework, no bedtimes, a world where no one reprimanded me for wanting to roam or run. A world where I was sister to the night. As if in answer to my thoughts, I heard a sound beyond me, beginning like a howl but rising into a song so beautiful that it made me weep. Moments later, I was surrounded by 5 slender, running forms, the slick black bodies of my sister wolves. My mother ran next to me. Without pausing, she nudged my side, and I knew that she was signaling her approval. I chuffed in acknowledgement. We ran until our bodies were exhausted. Then, we lay together and rested in a beautiful clearing underneath a starry sky. Looking up at the night, I felt an unprecedented sense of peace. Maybe my new life wouldn't be so terrible. I was part of a strong and loving family. I was young, but it would not be long before adulthood found me. Then, I would again have the option to don the shape to which I'd been born. And maybe, just maybe, I would find a mortal brave enough to give me a piece of his heart. Until then, I would be a part of the royalty of the forest. I would be the princess of the spaces between the trees. So, darling ones, what did you think about the story? Did you like the ending? Although the revelation of the grandfather's fate is very sad, I am delighted that our narrator is happy in her new environment. Not just that, but she also has hope for a better future. I sometimes imagine what it would be like to be a wolf, not so much about hunting, but about the freedom that would come with that state, the ability to run the forest trails on swift paws just to feel the wind in my fur. I guess our narrator will be able to experience that and much more before she returns to human form. Who knows, maybe in a forgotten life I was a Swiss as well. So, guys, tell me something. Have you ever fantasized about being a magical creature? If so, are you brave enough to tell me which one? Go on, leave a comment below the video. Intrigue me. Tonight, I am going to a bonfire meet in the 4th universe. In their Britain, the first fire dance celebrates springtime and the approaching summer. Attendees feast, sing and dance around the bonfire, then sit in a circle and astound each other with tales of the mystical, the magical, and the macabre. At the night's end, a winner is chosen and given a crown of flowers believed to bestow good fortune for the following year. Finding out which story will be voted the best is always a pleasure. Yes, don't worry. If I bring home the flower crown, I will let you all know. Wish me luck!